phone is here in Marshall County once again, and we're going to be talking to an individual who now lives in Charleston, West Virginia, but he's Marshall County through and through, as you will know immediately when you hear the name. Joe Holland, it's a real pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you, Ray. It'll be my pleasure.
Now, your father, I probably had a nickname around this county as the world's greatest sports fan.
Well, I think that was one of his titles, and he certainly was a great sports fan since I can remember.
It doesn't seem to me that it's been more than a year or so, but I expect it's been longer since his death.
It's been 4 years. About 4 years since he died.
I know immediately everyone began to say, now we have to do something to honor him, because he was the biggest fan that Marshall County High School ever had. And so they've gotten together a scholarship fund.
Yes, they did put together a scholarship fund, and it has done quite well. It's grown and continues to grow. Mm-hmm. I think Bill Morgan headed that up.
Yes, Bill Morgan headed the drive, and everyone I know is glad that he did. Had he not done it, I'm sure someone else would have, but Bill was right there.
And he was a good man for it.
He certainly was. Well, it's good to see you back in Marshall County, although I know it's a sad occasion in many ways to have just lost your mother.
Well, it was a rather sad occasion, but it was not unexpected. She had a stroke about 2.5 months ago, and she had been bedfast and really more or less comatose since then. So it wasn't unexpected, and it's a blessing that she did not linger any longer than she did. Our family was all here, and she was ready to go, and I think everyone has accepted it quite well.
Joe, do you remember your grandparents? You know, a lot of people who listen to this broadcast and who later play the tapes at the State Capitol Archives in Frankfort and at Murray State's Pogue Library and at the Marshall County Library, there will be 3 copies posted for posterity. Those people often like to trace genealogies. Do you remember your grandparents?
I do remember my 2 grandfathers. I do not remember my grandmothers. They had both passed on before I was able to remember. But I remember both my grandfathers quite well. We call my granddad Solomon. We call him Granddad, and we call my other grandpa, who was Grandpa Holland. Mm-hmm. And I remember them both quite well, and attended both of their funerals when I was up in at least my teenage and probably in my early 20s with my Grandpa Holland. So
now, did you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have 2 sisters who live in and around Benton in Marshall County. My sister Ruth, who lives at Brewers and has for many, many years, married Carl Chester. They live on a farm near Brewers. My other sister is Pat Frazier. She lives at Gibbertsville, near Kentucky Dam, and my mother, for the last few years since my father's death, had lived with Pat and Ben Frazier. And I have a brother, Charlie Holland, who lives in Maysville, Kentucky, and has for a number of years.
Well, Joe, you were a great athlete at Benton. I suppose did you go to Benton all your school years?
Yes, I started my school. I started my school years in Benton when I was in the 1st grade. I was born in Birmingham.
Now that'll please Mark Clayton.
A couple of miles.
He's always bragging about Birmingham.
Out of Birmingham on a farm, and we lived there until I was about 4, and our farmhouse burned down. And my mother and father picked up and took a Model T, and there were 3 kids at that time. There were 3 of us, and headed for California. And
I didn't know that angle. Interesting.
And Ty Goheen was out there, and you know Ty's still around here,
Mm-hmm.
and he was working in the oil fields, and he had asked my dad to come out there, work in the oil fields, and play baseball. So they headed west and took us kids with them.
Two very fine baseball players, I'd say.
Yes, they both were quite fine baseball players in their day, and so we lived there, and I have some very faint memories of California. Not enough to really discuss, but stayed there for a year or so, and came back. And Louis Zoe was sheriff of Marshall County, and I think my dad went to Detroit for about 6 months in that period of time. We were up there for a little while, but he liked Marshall County, and he wanted to get back here, and Louis was a good friend of his, and Louis called him and asked him to be a deputy sheriff. So he came back here from Detroit, and we settled in Benton, in Cole's Edition, and I started my school years in Benton under Miss Georgia.
Miss Georgia Brandon.
That's correct.
A great teacher.
Great teacher. I remember all of my teachers with a lot of fondness at Benton, all the way through Benton grade school and Benton high school.
Well, now you were, your father was a great athlete, and you were a great athlete. I well remember when you played, and it's was brought back to me recently when Shelby McCallum said something about he used to take some kids down to the pool at Paducah, and that he was one of the world's poorest swimmers, but that you were so good that small children would ride along on your back.
Well, Shelby reminded me of that this evening when I was talking with him. But we did used to go to Noble Park, and we did always have a lot of fun swimming in the Noble Park pool and playing with each other and with the kids. And I suppose I did become a good swimmer at an early age because my dad, we were raised on the Tennessee River. And I remember my brother and I both swam the Tennessee River by the time I think he was 10 and I was 12, when we swam across and back the Tennessee River, and my dad followed along in a boat. And so I suppose we were good swimmers at an early age.
Yeah. Now, Benton, of course, when you were in school, did not play football.
No, they had no football. In fact, I wanted to play football and almost moved to Tillman and stayed with an aunt. Considered going to Tillman and staying with an aunt so I could play football in high school. But after, when you grow up and get with the kids that you like and live with, you don't really want to leave. So we didn't leave. I didn't leave.
So you did, though, play basketball. Do you remember when you started that?
Yes, I remember. And I might mention something else here concerning basketball. My first memory of Marshall County basketball goes way back. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to the team of at Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
McCoy Terry.
1932.
Sanders Watkins.
That was
Virgil
a great
Provine.
team, and they won the first round of the state
Robert
tournament.
Goheen. And probably Cecil Duncan, that's right,
Mm-hmm.
Duncan.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, that's my first memory, and then it goes on, I have memories of the Sharp team in 38 that won the state tournament.
Yes.
And the Hardin team that almost won it in 40, where you went to school, and
Yes.
41, I guess it was.
That's right.
John Paget and Billy Irwin and Paget,
the
Trimble boys,
and
yes.
the Thompsons.
And the Thompsons, right.
I suppose that would have been the starting lineup anyway. There were several others.
Right,
like
and I played against that team, by the way, as I was a sophomore at Benton High School, and played against that team and played against John Paget when I was a sophomore. Then our team was 43, was my senior year, and we...
Now that particular year, the war had brought rationing of a lot of things, and they redesigned the state tournament. It was not a Sweet 16.
That is correct. And the
yeah.
only time in history that was ever, the one and only year that
Mm-hmm.
it happened,
Mm-hmm.
that we didn't have the Sweet 16. But we were fortunate enough to go to the
Final Four.
Final Four. We got through the regional tournament and went to the Final Four. So we went to Lexington. We had a sectional and then to the Final Four.
Mm-hmm.
And we felt like we had the team that could. We had a lot of size. E.W. Prince and I both were about 6'4", 6'4.5".
Mm-hmm.
And we had Country Thompson, who lived in Benton all of his life. He was
I
killed in a
remember.
car wreck a few years back.
I remember Country well.
And he was a big, strong boy, about
Yes, he was.
probably 6 feet and strong. And Julian Jones, small but good. And Smith Dunn, who was an outstanding player, outstanding.
He was.
And,
solidly built.
Solid and about close to 6 feet tall and maybe 6'1", and an excellent shooter. So we had a good team. We didn't have a lot of depth, although we had some good players and that did come in and help us. And we felt like we were good enough to win the state tournament, but we really ran into a buzzsaw the first game in Lexington against Heinemann.
Mm-hmm.
And we also had illness on the team at the time. Smith particularly was quite ill, and we were not at full strength, but that's really not an excuse. Heinemann came in and they shot over our zone. We had a zone defense, and they shot over it, and one guy who was averaging about 5 points made 20 points. And
those things happen.
They do happen, so we did lose in that game, and but it was a great experience, and we certainly will always remember that.
Now, you, of course, graduated when the war was going on. Now, you didn't get to start to college immediately, did you?
Well, Ray, I did. As a matter of fact, I had a scholarship already awaiting me at Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And I did go immediately to Lexington and entered school that summer. However, I had taken a V-12 test, which was an officer's training course in the Navy. And after I was in Lexington for about 2 or 3 weeks, I got a call that I had passed the V-12 and that I was to report for duty at Berea, Kentucky, which was very close to Lexington.
That's right.
I had to come back home.
25.
I came back home on the train, and then a week later headed for Berea. And a couple of my other friends here in town went with me, Robert Schimmel and Roy D. Williams. Both went to Berea at the same time I did.
That was a preacher's boy.
Preacher's boy.
Mm-hmm.
He was also on that basketball squad of 1943.
Now, how long were you in service?
Okay, I was in the service for 27 months. I was at Berea for 8 months. In V-12, and I decided I'd like to fly airplanes, so I transferred to V-5, which was the Naval Air Corps training program. And from there I went to a place called, I went to Hutchinson, Kansas to wait to get into a pre-flight training. Later to St. Louis, what they call tarmac. Then I came back, of all places, and was sent to Murray for prep school.
Yeah.
And was there for about 3 months.
I started to say they had a Navy pre-flight program at Murray State.
I was at Murray State, came right back there for about 3 months, and then I guess somehow they found out that I was a basketball player in high school and a pretty good size. They sent me to Iowa City for the winter of 43, 44. And that was Iowa pre-flight. They were more famous for their football teams in those days, but they also played...
Was Murray Warmoth coaching there then?
Well, he was coaching at Iowa. He was coaching at the University of Iowa at that time, yes. And of all people...
Leonard Metcalf went out there after the war.
Yes, he did. I remember that. Yes, I do. Anyhow, I went to Iowa. Now, University of Iowa still had their team.
Yeah.
But Iowa pre-flight, Seahawks, had a team also. And so I was there taking my pre-flight and just happened to be during the basketball season.
Oh, isn't that great? That's wonderful. Iowa has had some dark days in football recently, but this year they've been Well, in fact, they ranked #1 for a while.
They really did, and I think they certainly deserve that ranking. I think their quarterback perhaps should be the Heisman winner this year. He's had an outstanding year. And Iowa, anyhow, I was at Iowa City in pre-flight for 4 months, and then left there and started actual flight training at Norman, Oklahoma.
Yes.
Which they had
University of
a
Oklahoma.
primary, that's right, University of Oklahoma, primary flight school, and we actually did our flying, started flying there, and I spent about 4 months there to finish my primary flight training, and then we went from there to Corpus Christi, Texas, and was in Corpus Christi, Texas, and at a place called Cabinets Field, and we were flying. Well, we flew these Stearman airplane, bi-wing plane, training plane that I was in Norman, Oklahoma. Then in Texas, we flew SNJs. Or I guess the Army called them AT-6s and the Navy SNJs. And I was in advanced flight training and link training when the war ended. This was in it was in August of '45, and the war ended, and they gave the cadets in my area and the ones where we were our choice. We could stay in. We stayed in. We had to sign up for 4 more years, or we could get out. So I was rather anxious to get back to school.
You still had Adolph Rupp's scholarship?
I still had the scholarship at Kentucky and was rather anxious to get back to playing basketball at the University of Kentucky and to get back to college. So I did. I chose to.
Did you go back then in the fall of '45?
I went back in the fall of '45 to Kentucky.
Now, was that about the time that Adolph had a problem? I guess it was a good problem, of maybe about 7 All-Americans.
Well, that happened the next year. The first year I went back, I entered with Ralph Beard and Jones. Wallace Jones came the same year I did back to school, and
Ralph was a '45 graduate.
It was a
at
'45 at Mayo, and Jones from Holland the same year. Wawa Jones. And they had left over from the previous year. They had Jack Tingle, and they had Jack Parkinson, and that year, and a guy named Dutch Campbell.
Yes.
And they put together and Buddy Parker and Bill Sturgill, and those two fellows happened to be 2 of my very best friends, who you probably know. Bill Sturgill, having
surely
worked, he was active with John Y. Brown, right?
He's been in state government.
Yes, with state government with John Y. and Energy Commissioner and Agriculture Commissioner and a lot of different things. And Buddy Parker's been in the real estate business in Lexington for many, many years, and they became 2 of my very best friends, as the other boys did, but they played on the same team there in '45, '46, and we won the NIT that year.
Yes.
And the SEC as well.
When did Alex come about that time, Groza?
Groza came the following year. Alex came, and along with Bob Branham came back from the service, and a fellow named Jim Jordan came in, who had been an All-American at North Carolina, and Cliff Barker came back from as a prisoner of war from Europe, from the service. Kenny Rollins came back that year. And there were several other recruits that came in.
Well, that was a time for handling people, I guess, with kid gloves, because you had just an awful lot of talent there.
It was the beginning of an era, and there was an awful lot of talent there, and Coach Rupp and Coach Harry Lancaster. Harry had also come back from the service and joined university that year. And
now, was he at Eastern a while before the war? No, I'm thinking of another fellow.
You're thinking of Paul McBrayer,
who coached with Rupp.
He coached with Rupp.
That's right.
Now, one thing I didn't mention a while ago, Ellis Johnson, who most
Moorhead?
Fans around the state know from Moorhead, and as an All-American at Kentucky.
Yes.
Was when I was Iowa pre-flight. He was one of the PE officers at Iowa, and I got well acquainted with Ellis at that time. In fact, still know Ellis.
Fine fellow, wasn't he?
He really was and is. He had a stroke about 2 or 3 years ago, and he's making a remarkable recovery, really. He lives in Huntington, West Virginia, near me.
Now, you were in that group that was known as the Fabulous Five, and
Well, Ray, I was in that group all the way through. I'm not known as a member, as a Fabulous Five in Kentucky, probably for a few reasons. I played an awful lot during those years. I was a starter for most of the time during those years. But I did not start on the team that won the NCAA in '48.
And that was the year when, I guess, the first college team in history, more or less, that won the Olympics.
Yes,
pretty
and
much.
I went as an alternate to the Olympic Games. Dale Barnstable and Jim Line and myself were alternates, and the other five were on the team with the Phillips Oilers and with four other at-large players.
Now, let's see, did Kentucky won 2 years consecutively?
And they won also in '49.
49.
Now, I graduated in '48. I had another year of eligibility and could have gone back another year, and Coach Rupp and Coach Lancaster tried hard and wanted me to come back the next year for another year, and I no doubt would have been a starter that year.
Did you play any with the Indianapolis Olympians?
Yes, I did. Here, I was coming to that. Actually, I had graduated. I had a year of credits. I transferred from Berea back to Kentucky. So I graduated in 3 years after I went back to Kentucky. And I had gotten married in '47.
How did you meet your wife?
Well, met her on campus, and she chased me till I caught her. But her father was in the automobile business. And he had 5 daughters, no sons, and he had started talking to me as soon as I knew I was graduating to try to get me to come to West Virginia and start learning the car business. So that had a lot to do with me not going back to college in '48, '49. So actually I went to work and I moved to Madison, West Virginia, and went to work in the car business. And then that year...
Was that the best thing you could have done, probably?
Well, it certainly has turned out very well. And you can't regret moves that you make.
No.
And although, I've missed probably a lot of recognition by not going back and playing on that team another year, I think I've been cut out of a lot of recognition because I didn't go back that year. But that doesn't mean too much after you get into the business world and into things that really, your family and other things, that really doesn't mean all that much.
Yeah.
But I did, after a year working for him, I found out that this was in the late '40s, that the car business was pretty automatic. You ordered cars from the factory, they sent them in, and people took them away from you. So there wasn't an awful lot of salesmanship, or
didn't have to
do much selling. So actually,
and you also had the #1 brand, was it Chevrolet?
Chevrolet and Oldsmobile at that time, and so there really wasn't. I was learning, I really was, and there was a lot to learn. But my boys at Kentucky, I hadn't played enough basketball, and they graduated, and they had a barnstorming tour planned. They called me and asked me to join them, which I was happy to do, and I did. And we barnstormed throughout Kentucky and a few other places. And then the NBA and another league, NBL, were vying for players and for different combinations. Indianapolis in the NBL offered us the franchise, and they offered to give it to us and finance it. And although it's hard to see why Groza, the big money wasn't there then. Groza and Beard were the stars on the team, and they could have made a lot more money going elsewhere. They decided they would do this.
Mm-hmm.
So they asked me to join them, and I did join them in Indianapolis,
Mm-hmm.
where I played for 3 years with Indianapolis, and we played, we merged with the NBA after 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the beginning of the NBA.
Yes.
And we played all the New York and all the teams, Boston, and all the teams that are in the NBA now, the last 2 years that I played. Kusi was playing at Boston.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the great players that you hear about.
Well, Joe Fawkes was at Philadelphia.
Joe, we played against Joe Fawkes at Philadelphia. I guarded Joe a few times.
Mm-hmm.
He was on his, he had passed his peak,
Yes.
but he could still shoot. Joe was a great shooter.
He was a great player. I well remember he was freshman the same year I was at Murray State, and I don't think I've ever seen his equal in that little jump shot that he had. And
He still holds some records
yes,
in the NBA.
uh-huh.
He really does.
And I noticed that he made the team of the quarter century, or was it half century or something or other, for the league. And
Yes, he did.
and that's, of course, a tremendous honor. I don't want to bring up any old memories and don't want to dig into any dirt or any odd names or personalize anything. I'd just like to point out, I guess, for some of our listeners who are knowledgeable about it, that there was never any question of your being involved in the scandals that came up. I don't know how you managed that.
Well, Ray, there wasn't, and I was very fortunate, and I say maybe I'm just lucky because I didn't go back to school in 48, 49 season, because that's the year that it really happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Beard was my roommate and a close friend of mine. I like to think if I'd have gone back, maybe I could have influenced him away from it.
Yeah.
But those are things that you speculating about because nobody knows.
But you did have a good Marshall County upbringing and some fine parents.
There's no question about that, and I don't believe that I would have been in it under any conditions. However, I don't know.
No.
Nobody knows.
No one can.
But we were with, by the way, in Indianapolis, Beard and Groza when they got picked up.
Mm-hmm.
Jones and Barker and myself were with them in Chicago. We'd been to an all-star game in Chicago. Came out of the stadium, we were picked up by a group of men and thrown into a car and rushed across town to Cook County Courthouse and spent the night. And they wouldn't even let Barker and I talk, although they knew we weren't involved. They kept us in separate rooms all night long. They kept Beard and Groza in here under the bright lights all night.
Mm-hmm.
And they confessed that night. And they had Barnstable picked up in Louisville at the same time. Mm-hmm. And it was a sad moment in my life, and it certainly something I will never forget. However, I would like to point out that those boys were not represented. They did not get fair treatment. They have all come back and made themselves a life that most people would be very proud of.
Very good. I'm certainly glad to hear you say that. Well, our time is rolling along pretty rapidly. We're down to 4 minutes. Now, that doesn't mean we got to quit immediately, but I want to make sure that we get in anything that you particularly want to tell. Do you have any children?
Yes, I do have. I have 2 children. I have a son, Joey, who is my youngest, and a daughter, Teresa. Teresa is 33, and Joey is 30 years old. Mm-hmm. They are both they have been with me in business for many years. I've been in the car business in Charleston since 1956 in Charleston, West Virginia, in a Chevrolet dealership. And we just recently opened a place in Louisville that Teresa and my son-in-law, Steve Bachman, have taken over there in this dealership. It's off of Hurstbourne Lane between Louisville and Lexington. Steve, by the way, is a native of Louisville. He went to high school in Louisville, and he's a CPA with Cooper and Lybrand in Louisville for 3 years before he came with me, and he worked for me for about 9 years. So he is well prepared, and Teresa has also worked with us for about 9 years.
Okay. We won't start till you say so, and when I do start, I'll make a little spiel about this is the oral history broadcast, and we're broadcasting from the Holland
I'd
Lake
like
Riley
to-
and so on.
I'd like to get, I don't know how to go about it.
Okay.
I'd like to kind of just get in mention, just merely mention, the tragedy that we had in the family.
Uh-huh.
21 years ago, this Wednesday after Christmas. There'll never be no record of it if I don't get it in. Do you know it?
That's right.
Huh?
Sure. That's now.
The tragedy that we had in the family.
Uh-huh.
21 years ago, this Wednesday after Christmas.
Uh-huh.
There'll never be no record of it if I don't get it in. Do you know it?
That's right.
Huh?
Sure. That's now.